Raw data would have been a product because there was no consumer grade anything in suspension at the time. But then my mate said, well, don't you want the answer? Why don't you find the answer out? And no one's ever done that before on any vehicle that I knew of.
This is the classic IoT problem, right? You have to go and do all these things and get loads of data and then figure out what those lines make.
That's the art of engineering though, isn't it? Is getting the things you want with the things you've got.
But the grit is what you need, in my opinion. And that grit is what people who make a successful product have. I just get groups of nerds together to make things happen. I'm here with Nigel Wade from Dusty Dynamics, a friend of mine from university who's gone on to make a very successful product called ShockWiz. Nigel got element engineering involved, and we're very lucky to be part of that process.
And I got my first good mountain bike coming out of uni once I had a couple of dollars from my first job. And I got this thing, it came with an air fork on it, and I went, well, okay, I should be able to figure this out. And I went and borrowed a linear pot from the motorsport guys, made a data logger with parts from SparkFun, put it together, started making spreadsheets of log data, hundreds and hundreds of hours of testing. This is purely just for my own benefit at this point, right? Just to figure out what's going on my, might have even been a hardtail.
So this is a mechatronics engineer with a electronics background.
With spare time.
With a lot of spare time, spare cash, but also...
young. This is what you get. I think I had 9 clicks of rebound available at the time, so I went to one jump and just did run after run of one click, do 2 runs, 1 click, 2 runs. And then you throw in, pressure, and then there's the interaction between rebound and pressure, or rebound and ramp, or, compression damping. It goes on and on. This is what ShockWiz does, is that it takes the trail inputs and the dynamic response that you get. That's what you care about, but then what you've got is the knobs to twiddle, or you can add pressure, you can add a token, whatever. You got the goal there, and you got the what you can actually change here, and you got to somehow join them up and figure out, okay, you do this one that way and this one that way, and that'll make this thing better. It's always finding the point of best compromise.
Yeah.
It's in a passive system, you're never going to be ideal everywhere.
So you went through the phase of making a widget, then getting some data, interpreting the data, then trying to put some algorithms around that information, which gives you basically another level up. It's like a transformation on top of the raw data, some insights effectively.
Well, yeah, raw data would have been a product at the time, because there was no consumer grade anything with suspension, right, at the time. But then my mate said, well, why don't you just don't you want the answer? Why don't you find the answer out? And I went, oh. Okay, no one's ever done that before in any, on any vehicle that I knew of. I said no, and then I kind of went, well, hang on, why am I saying no? And then I said, well, oh, you can't do it because of, and then I would stop myself and say, no, a computer could do that. And then he's like, oh, but you can't because of, no, hang on, a computer could do that. Oh, hang on.
Yeah.
I want to shoot this down, but I can't shoot it down. And now that my mate's come up with it, I need to follow this through. So then it became about writing the algorithms to take, okay, how much pogo are you getting, for example? How much bobbing are you getting? How much packing are you getting? How do you even quantify packing?
So it's a characterization of an event.
Yes, that it looks for very specific points in the trail as you're riding, and will pick out the detail and will characterize, okay, you have gone through a rock. It's figured out you've gone into a place where packing could have occurred. It's going to categorize how bad was that, how often is it happening, and then from there you add that into, if it's pogoing and all the other things, and then you got to figure out what you need to change in order to fix those issues and improve the performance.
So you've done the hard stuff, basically.
Well, may as well. I'm 27. I've got time on my hands.
It's pretty ballsy. We met up after university. I was doing some work in IoT for tyre pressure sensors. We came to my little workshop at the time. We probably had five guys across mechanical, electronics, and a bit of software. And we talked about, how I was doing the depressor or something like that in the ceiling. And then I got the opportunity to ride with one of your data loggers, which was basically a SparkFun board with a pressure sensor that logged to an SD card. We strapped it onto the mountain bike here in Kalamunda, and we basically did this run that we did today. And so once we'd done 2 laps, you got the little tiny laptop out, and it gave you a recommendation, which was just like a number between 0 and 5 or whatever it was. So you changed the knobs on the back of the bike, and I did a couple more runs. And for me, the bike felt completely different, and it felt instantly better. I used to think I knew suspension and bike. I quickly learned that I knew not much about suspension.
It's context specific and it's rider specific. You're not a heavy car where the human doesn't really matter. The human is the main thing. What forces they're putting into the bike, the terrain they're on. It's not one size fits all. You can't just go, well, look, Bruni's fast, I'm going to copy his settings.
Yeah.
That just won't work. You've got to actually measure what's going on and then make it right for you.
I was pretty convinced at that point, people who could have potentially buy a big top-end bike may actually not be getting the best ride for them because they've not set it up. It could feel as bad as an entry-level bike because you've got it not set up correctly.
Hi, I'm Nigel, founder of Dusty Dynamics and inventor of the ShockWiz suspension tuning system.
You ended up doing a Kickstarter. How many backers was it to start off with? 500?
It was 400 backers, 500 devices.
The Kickstarter was basically going to be the initial funding to supply those 500 devices and also do the engineering required to get to V1, which was a mega epic stretch goal, but it could have happened, I think, if we really wanted it to happen. But I think you did exactly the right thing by going and seeing if there's going to be more support from outside.
Yeah, spoke to SRAM one night at about midnight, I think, my time, because it was, you know, a nice time in Chicago. They invited me to Europe and then they invited me to America, so went and saw them. Yeah, they were on board from the start, really.
Yeah.
And turbocharged through an acquisition. SRAM bought the rights for pedal bicycles, not motorbikes.
SRAM took on board the mechanical and industrial design, and then we ended up doing the electronics, the firmware and the app.
You took on the testing as well, which I think is an overlooked but important part of the whole thing. The firmware testing, all the scripts and things that would test firmware, make sure it didn't break under all sorts of scenarios.
Yeah, Nigel would come down to the office at least once a week for a very long period. We tried to get a firmware port onto the Frankenbox.
Onto a dev board or something?
Yeah, onto a dev board. We made a Frankenboard which had components on there that could be used in the V1, and we basically got firmware working on that. We were able to get some recommendations out of it, but there is a real challenge in taking a Python script with, you know, effectively unlimited RAM, or limited by your small computer, RAM, and CPU constraints, and putting that into a microcontroller that may have 64 kilobytes of flash and 16 kilobytes of RAM, something like that. That's a huge undertaking that not a lot of people understand about IoT. There's a process of getting electronics working. There's a process of getting firmware working that's replicating what the functionality you actually want. There's a process of actually trying to figure out meaningful information from the data that you've got, and then doing all of that inside a microcontroller that might cost you $10 and has absolutely minimum resources, needs to conserve power and give massive battery life, and can interface with a person's phone or via Bluetooth. It's
in real time.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge.
When I came to you, I had firmware in a form, I had mechanics in a form, I had electronics in a form, but they're all separate. You guys really, it was about bringing it all together, shrinking it down, getting it in the box, making it work all the time, because you don't want something that works 90 whatever % of the time. It has to work all the time. It's got to work with this, it's got to work with that, it's got to work with all the Apple things.
Yeah. To do IoT properly, you really need to be talking in the same language across different domains: mechanical, electronics, firmware, software, UI, UX, has to be fed back into all these things, industrial design. Yeah, having the opportunity to do that on ShockWiz was amazing. We also had a couple of guys working on the app. The app was done in Cordova at the time, which is a cross-platform JavaScript-based programming language that then you can apply to iOS and Android. We did up the screens, the UI, UX for the app, and basically those screens are nearly the same as what they are now still. Apps are hard. Apps are still hard today.
Yeah.
If you're going to do an app properly, you need two teams. You need an iOS team and an Android team. We've found ways now to do both with the same people, but they still need quite specific skills. So doing it in the way that we did, you know, to start off with the cross-platform JavaScript stuff was good, but it has limitations. And we found the limitations through ShockWiz, right?
Yeah.
And had to engineer around them, which is not always the best way, but it is what it is.
That's the art of engineering, though, isn't it? Is getting the things you want with the things you've got.
Yeah, exactly.
So, that's ShockWiz in a nutshell, really, I suppose. Yeah, it was bootstrapped in those early years for sure, and I didn't take a wage for years.
Yeah, that's not an uncommon story. I remember spending 15-hour days with Sam with firmware, just getting bugs out and... Yeah,
that'll be done by Tuesday. Here we are, Thursday night, 2 o'clock in the morning. I've got a flight at 5:15 flight out of the airport. It was an international flight, so I've got to be there at 3:30 or something, and I think you're driving down my driveway at 1:30 in the morning to hand me a box, a magic box that does whatever we were working on. It's like, yeah, I think it works. Yeah. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to have 90 minutes sleep, get up, have a shower, drive to the airport, and spend the next 30 hours on a plane to get to America.
That's sleep time, right? In economy.
Yeah.
I remember going to spearfish in the workshop, using the calibration rig that we had, and there being hundreds of Bluetooth devices around that are just sitting on shelves waiting for people to pick up a phone, and not being able to calibrate the first batch of ShockWizes because of electrical noise or Bluetooth noise. Oh. So Sam was having to refine scripts and things like that, just get around the electrical noise, and end up putting it in a makeshift anechoic chamber known as an aluminium foil hat. There's certain ways to do things. We call them like smash CAD in mechanical engineering, or there's like the pro production way to do things. And you've got to choose a point in between, which is relevant to the product that you're working on.
Cost, time, or awesomeness, choose any two.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a triangle.
It's the engineering triangle.
The grit is what you need, in my opinion. And that grit is what most entrepreneurs or most people who make a successful product have. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Yeah. Sometimes in engineering,
sometimes happens.
you do that, right? You go, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm getting a different result. Why? Yeah. And if you don't have the grit to continue to keep going to figure that out, if you pack up and go home, you will take an inordinate amount of time to be able to get back in that zone, to be able to conquer that thing. Those late nights or continuing down a path which you know there's an outcome but you can't see it just yet is the epitome of product development, in my opinion.
It's the details as well, right?
Yes, the details are another one.
Dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
Yes.
There's multiple things in ShockWiz, I remember, where every ride was a test ride there for about 3 or 4 years. And you'd go out and you'd come home, I'd look at the data and I'd go, that's not quite right. And you dig into it, and you'd say, okay, there's one place out of the 20Ks or 30Ks, whatever I did, there's one place that's just not quite doing exactly what I'm hoping. And I could have just gone,
Yes.
But I chose to go, hang on, I want to understand that. I want to, because if it's happening once for me, maybe someone's in Europe and on their trails it's happening, multiple times a ride or something. And there's a few times like that. We remember we went down to Pemberton and we did these
the
rollers, and they were picking it up as jumps at the time. And you go, well, I don't think my tire's leaving the ground. I'm not perceiving my tire's leaving the ground. It's possible my tire's leaving the ground, but I don't consider it to be a jump. Okay, how can we make it? And you look at the data, it looks like a jump for all money. Yeah. And you got to go, how are we going to make this try and figure out that it's not a jump? And it would pick it up 3 times on this one track, only on one track. And it's like, and it would be months and months of work then. We added in this accelerometer, which would sort of verify that it was a jump, and you sort of combine these, you call it sensor fusion if you want. It just looked at 2 different input streams, and we refined it. And for me, it makes my ride on one track somewhere I go rarely better, but maybe for someone else it's their entire track. For something like ShockWiz that's getting used all around the world, that was pretty important, right? That you've got to be good everywhere. You can't just be good in one place and go, well, we're done now, that's it. You've got to continually improve.
It's got to look and feel as good as the performance, because it could just be a box.
That's really what SRAM brought to ShockWiz, I think. Moderate amount of money as well. They made it look a lot nicer than it was. The usability of it with the different lengths hoses and stuff, that was a triumph, I think. But they brought that really good industrial design. And when you look at the plastics, there's no draft on the plastics. And for the nerds out there, that'll mean something. For everyone else, but I mean, if I did it with my money, there would be draft on the plastic, right? And it would be worse. I was like, let's get it out, These guys have been waiting probably over a year at the time.
Kickstarter.
They supported us, let's get it out. And they went, no, we need to get it right. We don't want them to have a bad first impression. We don't want the first result on Google to be, why does ShockWiz suck? Or why does my ShockWiz do such and such? We want it to be tickety-boo, which involved a lot of internal testing in SRAM, a lot of testing here. And then when it went out, it was almost a fizzer when it went out, because nothing really happened. We had this grace period where just the 500 odd units went out to the Kickstarter people, and that was it. It wasn't for sale at this point. We wanted 2 months or whatever. We're going to let them use it, give us feedback, and we got some feedback, but we didn't really need to change that much because we'd sort of done the work already. So these people were getting a relatively polished product. The reviews were predominantly positive and all the rest of it, and that's really what SRAM doubled down on. And if I had released it myself, I probably would have released it too early. Wouldn't have put enough money into, you know, the aesthetics and stuff like that.
Or the calibration process, or the polishing of the app.
It just would have been a bit clunky. It would have you disconnected from your phone. All that, you know, it would have just had a few little which aren't deal breakers in themselves, but they kind of build up particularly when you're in a consumer product. People expect an iPhone. This is the problem. People expect this super polished thing, and they go, well, why is this $500? I can buy an iPhone for $1,000. And I mean, sure you can, but they make millions of those, and we're making not. They want this refined thing, and if it's not a refined thing, they're going to tell you about it. And maybe they won't put it online, but maybe they'll say to their mates, you know what? Yeah, don't buy that.
News travels fast, especially.
Bad news travels very fast. When we did release it to the public, we sold out within 18 hours, I think. And it was much higher than we anticipated, and sold out super quick, and that triggered a whole bunch of stuff to try and get more parts and everything and build them up, because I think it had this kind of pent up, it had been out there, got, you know, reasonable feedback, and then everyone kind of wanted it in those first few months.
The strategy that you kind of went with, and the same thing that SRAM went with as well with ShockWiz, was first mover advantage and trade secrets. A lot of the under the hood stuff is kept in-house and would be very, very hard to replicate in this particular case.
It's KFC basically, it's 11 herbs and spices. There's no patents on this stuff. It's all
and so that's one play, you know, patenting things has its place, but it wasn't used in this particular case.
It would have been difficult because it would have been a software patent.
But also when you're doing the patent, you're also kind of giving away the recipe.
You are,
So in this particular case, the trade secrets and first mover advantage was the strategy, and I think was executed very well. But it's not for everyone, and there's definitely different plays depending on the product, and so that's one of the challenges that we have, especially moving into IoT in industrial and consumer spaces when we talk with new customers. We have to look at the domain that they're in, have to understand what their exposure is to public domain and things like that, and then make a decision as to the play that they go down. Even still having a patent, you still then have to get first mover advantage in these days, because you will need to be able to fight that, someone else replicating you in court. So patents aren't everything, but they are very meaningful to investment processes and things like that. We still do lots of fun stuff with SRAM, and we still do some work with Nigel, which is awesome. So what's next for Dusty Dynamics?
I'm always looking at other aspects of the bike other than suspension, about what could improve the ride, you know. On a mountain bike, there's as many as you want to name really that affect your experience on the trails. And you got, you know, suspension moving, the humans moving, you got forces going here, there and everywhere. You got, you know, leaning, you got tires. It's an absolute minefield. I guess it's taking that ShockWiz philosophy and applying it to other areas, really.
You've got other things that you're working on, super secret, that could potentially make some big impact in the world, in my opinion.
We'll see.